Lane here. Today I am reading Paulo's Parachute Mission. Don't forget to stay tuned after the video. There's another video where Miss Nico will show you how to make your own parachute. So let's get started. Stopped, his hand hovering a few inches above it. Once that ball was out of the box, he would be completely unpacked, and the move would be final. "Hey, Paulo, I'm going to hang out with the neighbors," Paulo's older sister, Julia, called from down the hallway. "Have you seen my bag?" Relieved for the distraction, Paulo headed toward the rustling he heard in the kitchen. "Nope, haven't seen it," Paulo said as he rounded the corner. "Julia?" he called. The kitchen was empty. "Julia?" "Found it!" Julia sprang from behind a mountain of boxes and held up her bag as proof. "Hey, you should come meet everyone. It'll be fun." "No thanks, I think I'll stay here," Paulo said. "Suit yourself," Julia said. She walked over to Paulo and squeezed his shoulders. "It's gonna be okay, you know?" Paulo looked at the floor and nodded. "I know." It had been 2 months since the day Paulo's parents announced the family was moving. He had been eating lunch with May, Pai, Julia, and his best friend Andre. The smell of feijoada, salty pork, beans, and spices filled the room. Paulo and Andre had been talking about the big soccer game coming up. That was when Pai broke the news that they were moving. "Alcantara?" Julia had asked. "Do people even live there?" "Of course they live there," Pai said. "It will be a great adventure. You two have almost never been out of the city. You'll get to see a whole new world, plants and animals, and the sky. You'll be amazed at how brilliant the stars look without the lights of the city masking their glow." Paulo had barely heard Pai. How could they leave Brasilia? The big, bustling capital city was the only place Paulo had ever lived. His school, his friends, everything was in Brasilia. "But why?" Paulo finally managed to say. Maya had placed her hand over Paulo's. "Your Pai and I have been offered a chance to work with the scientists and other engineers at the space launch pad in Alcantara. We'll be on a team designing a craft that will travel into space. It'll help scientists make new discoveries. Isn't that exciting?" she had asked, squeezing his fingers. Paulo hadn't felt excited that afternoon. Now that he was sitting in their new kitchen, he still didn't feel excited. He didn't want to be in this new house, and he didn't want to make any new friends. Why would he need to? He already had Andre, his soccer team, and his friends at school in Brasilia. There was one more reason that Paulo hadn't wanted this change. He hadn't mentioned it to Mai or Pai. He didn't even like to think about it himself. Paulo was afraid that people in this new town might think he was different. He had been born with one hand that had 3 fingers instead of 5. It hardly affected anything Paulo did, but it didn't look the same as everyone else's hand. In Brasilia, people knew Paulo and were comfortable with his hand. They knew that his hand didn't matter, that he was just Paulo. But he couldn't help thinking that the people in this new town wouldn't know that. Paulo nudged open the screen door and stepped outside. He still found the quiet yard surrounding their new house strange, so different from the tall buildings and streets that ringed their old apartment building. For the past few nights, Paulo had sat outside and gazed up at the sky. "At least I still have the stars," he thought. In Brasilia, Paulo had loved looking at the stars each night before he fell asleep. Some people used holidays or changes in weather to mark the passing seasons. Paulo used the movement of the stars. He knew that when the Southern Cross was framed by his window, school would be starting soon. And when he could see the red of Betelgeuse and the blue of Rigel with Orion's belt in the middle, he knew spring was just around the corner. When Paulo looked out the window on any given night, everything he could see, from the stars to the moon to the planets, seemed totally still. But as the seasons passed, Paulo could watch the movement of lots of stars and planets in space just by looking through that window. Now, out here in Alcantara, the stars seemed like familiar friends. Paulo stood and walked around the yard. He spotted a box next to the corner of the house and peered inside. Gardening tools, a wrench set, and how'd that get in here? The object he pulled out looked like an old scrap of fabric, but it was much more than that to Paulo. He and Andre had made the paracaídas parachute to help them send messages to each other at night. They lived in the same apartment building, and Paulo's room had been just above Andre's. When they were supposed to be asleep, they used the parachute to send secret messages to each other. Andre would slide his messages into a little container and toss them up for Paulo to catch from his window. Paulo would attach his replies to the parachute and drop them down. Paulo's heart felt still as he remembered the old apartment and his friend. He held the parachute up and then let it go, watching it drift slowly to the ground. No use for this now, Paulo thought. He picked up the parachute again, then noticed someone at the edge of the yard. Paulo stared at the boy. The boy stared back. Neither spoke. Finally, Paulo broke the silence. Oi! Oi, your sister, Julia? She was talking to my sister, and she said that you're 12? I am too. Paulo nodded and raised an eyebrow. The boy continued. She says you like soccer, and I've been looking for someone to practice with. The boy trailed off. Paulo tried not to roll his eyes. He told Julia he didn't want to meet the other kids in the neighborhood. The boy was looking back at Paulo with wide, hopeful eyes. Not sure what else to do, Paulo stuck out his left hand, his 5-fingered hand, to introduce himself. Paulo almost always used his left hand to shake hands with new people, even though he knew most people would be expecting his right. I'm Paulo. The boy put out his right hand, then, looking confused, switched to his other hand. He smiled and said, I'm Lucas. Did you make that paracaídas? Yeah, Paulo said. I made it with a friend of mine. It's neat, Lucas said. What else do you like to do? Do you want to come kick the ball around? I have a goal set up in my backyard. No, Paulo said. The smile disappeared from Lucas's face. Feeling guilty, Paulo quickly added, I still have a lot of unpacking to do. Maybe we could do it tomorrow. Okay, yeah, Lucas said. I'll come by tomorrow. Good luck with unpacking, he said, then turned and jogged off. Paulo stepped back inside and let the door swing shut. Julia is in big trouble, he thought. The next day, Paulo spent all morning trying to come up with an excuse so he wouldn't have to play soccer with Lucas. More unpacking to do? Didn't feel well? Tired? Those excuses will work for a little while, Paulo thought, but they're not going to solve the problem. Finally, Paulo settled on a plan. He would go, kick the soccer ball, and talk to Lucas for a bit, and then explain that he didn't need any more friends. He had plenty back in Brasilia. Right after lunch, Lucas knocked on the kitchen door. As they walked down the dusty road to Lucas's backyard, Paulo realized he was hiding his 3-fingered hand against his side. He felt his face getting hot. I shouldn't be embarrassed, he reminded himself. Paulo made a conscious effort to swing his hand normally as he walked. Paulo glanced sideways at Lucas, but Lucas didn't seem to notice either Paulo's worrying or his hand. This is it, Lucas said. He pointed to a goal. 2 large tree branches stuck in the ground. A soccer ball sat between the posts. Lucas dribbled the ball and gently kicked it to Paulo. Why did your family move here? Lucas asked as they kicked the ball back and forth. For my parents' job. They're aerospace engineers, Paulo explained. Wow, they go into space? Lucas asked. No, they're not astronauts, Paulo said. Aw, Lucas said, his excitement fading. It would be awesome if they were. They get to work with astronauts sometimes, Paulo said quickly. He was annoyed at his urge to impress Lucas. Why did he care what Lucas thought if he didn't want him as a friend anyway? They work on teams that design spacecraft or parts of other things that fly, like planes. Right now they're working on a paracaídas that will be part of a spacecraft, Paulo continued. Like the one you had in your backyard? Lucas asked, popping the ball from one knee to the other. Kind of, Paulo said. When the rockets land, something has to slow them down so they don't hit the ground too hard, and that's where the parachute comes in. In Brasilia, my parents teach a whole course at the university about drag, air resistance, and how things fall through the air or the atmosphere on other planets. Well, they did when we lived there. Just then, Lucas gave the ball a quick kick, and it flew off to the left. Paulo reached over his head and grabbed the ball with both hands. Oh, Lucas said. He was staring at Paulo's hand, a look of surprise on his face. Paulo dropped the ball and stood still for a moment, looking at the ground. I've never been to Brasilia, Lucas said. What's it like? Paulo dribbled the ball between his feet a few times before looking up at Lucas. Was he not going to say anything about his hand? The city's great, Paulo said. There are always a lot of people in the parks and restaurants. It must be pretty different from here, Lucas continued. Yeah, Paulo said. My best friend Andre and I were always out with friends. There was so much to do. Silence hung between them for a few moments. There are things to do here, too, Lucas offered. Have you walked around outside of town yet? We could do that this afternoon if you want. I don't know, Paulo said. This is my chance, he thought to himself. I should just tell him that I don't need any more friends. Paulo opened his mouth to explain, but a nagging feeling in his stomach stopped him. Mai told me not to be gone too long, Paulo mumbled. I should really get back now. Oh, sure, Lucas said quickly, bouncing the soccer ball from his toe to his knee and back again. It's okay, we can go this weekend. It'll be great. Paulo managed to avoid Lucas the next day in school. Now all he had to do was make it through a trip home. As Paulo walked up his street, he saw Pi sitting on the front step. Mai was there too. No, not Mai, Paulo groaned. Lucas. Oi, Pi called as Paulo walked in the yard. There you are. You should have walked home with Lucas. You would have gotten here faster. Yeah, Lucas said. I realized you didn't know the shortcut home and I wanted to stop by to make sure you made it. I'll walk home with you next week. Shortcut, Paulo muttered as he joined them on the stoop. I didn't see you at school today, Lucas said, even at lunch. On Monday, I'll show you around if you want. Lucas was just telling me about some of these interesting trees nearby, Pi said. I was thinking the two of you could take a trip to get some capueca. If you bring back some, I bet I could convince Mai to make some of her famous ice cream. What do you say? Sounds great, Lucas said. Paulo couldn't believe this. No, he was shouting in his head, it's not great. But somehow, yeah, sounds good, is what actually came out of his mouth. I should head home, Lucas said, but I'll come to you tomorrow, okay? Paulo watched Lucas walk to the edge of the yard before turning to Pi. First Julia, now you, Paulo said. Why does everybody want me to hang out with Lucas? It'll do you good to start meeting some kids your own age, he said. I don't need to meet anyone, Paulo said. I have plenty of friends already. Fine, Pi said. I'll make you a deal. Go with Lucas. If you really don't want to be friends with him after that, I won't make you. You promise you won't say anything about it after that? Paulo asked. Pi nodded. Okay, Paulo said. It's a deal. Wake up, Pi called as he opened the door of Paulo's room. Time to get moving. Paulo barely cracked open one eye. What time is it? He asked, throwing his arm over his face. Time for exploring, Pi said. Come on, Lucas will be here soon. Okay, Paulo mumbled. He threw off his sheet and swung his feet onto the floor. I didn't realize exploring had to start so early, he muttered. He brushed past his dad and headed into the bathroom. Half an hour later, Paulo and Lucas were walking toward the trees on the edge of town. Looking back, Paulo saw the tile roofs of all the houses blending together to form red stripes along the edges of the street. Here we are, Lucas said. A tree. Huge, waxy leaves as long as Paulo's arm sprouted from the gnarled branches, making a bushy tuft at the top of the tree. The round, cream-colored capueca were about the size of Paulo's soccer ball. Great, Paulo said. I'll just climb up and grab one, and then we can head back. The bark was rough under Paulo's hand as he pulled himself up the trunk. I think I've got it, Paulo said, stretching his arm toward one of the melons. As soon as he had good grip on it, he began to twist and pull on the fruit. With a snap, Paulo broke the capueca off the tree and held it in one hand. Okay, I'm going to drop this down to you. Ready? Ready, Lucas said. Paulo gently tossed the fruit toward the spot where Lucas was standing. Whoa, Lucas called as the fruit flew by, narrowly missing him and crashing onto the ground. With a crack, the melon broke open, splattering on the ground. Even from up in the tree, Paulo could see dirt and twigs clinging to the fruit. Nice catch, Paulo called. No wonder you stick to soccer. Hey, it's not my fault. You're pelting me with fruit, Lucas said with a laugh. I didn't, though, said Paulo. I guess when I dropped it, gravity just took over. Paulo scanned the branches around him and sighed as he began scooting down the tree. I don't see any others that I can reach. We'll have to find another tree. You know what we need? Lucas asked. Your parachute. That thing? Paulo scoffed as he reached the ground. It won't work. The fruit is too heavy. Even if the parachute attached, the fruit will still crash. We could change the parachute, though, Lucas said. If your parents can make a parachute that stops a spaceship from crashing, we've got to be able to make one for the fruit. What was that you were talking about the other day? Drag? How does that work? Paulo wrinkled his brow as he tried to remember some of the things he heard his mom and dad discuss. I think it has to do with atmosphere. Here on Earth, we call our atmosphere air. Even though we can't see air, air is made up of stuff, Paulo said. When something falls through the atmosphere, it pushes away the air in its path. Huh? Lucas asked. I think it's like this, Paulo said. If you wanted to walk quickly down a crowded street, there would be lots of people in your way. You'd bump up against people in the crowd, and they'd bump you back. Lucas nodded. The crowd slows you down. Exactly, Paulo said. When something is falling through the atmosphere, it's kind of like that. The thing that is falling pushes against the air, and the air pushes back, and that's called drag. We need to create more drag on the fruit so that it falls slowly enough to land on the ground without breaking. We'll have to make a parachute that's a lot bigger than the one you had in your yard. We can definitely make this work, Lucas said. Paulo couldn't help smiling a little bit. Lucas never gave up. Paulo had to admit he kind of liked it. Yeah, Paulo said. I guess you're right. Let's go make a parachute. As the boys jogged toward Paulo's house, Paulo remembered something he had heard his mom and dad talk about 100 times at the dinner table. You know, Paulo said, real engineers have to fix and change the technologies they design all the time. Yeah, but they work on important technologies like spaceships and stuff, Lucas said. We're just working on a little parachute. It's still a technology, though, Paulo said. Pai always says that a technology is anything or process that people design to help solve a problem. If we design our parachute well, it will help us solve the problem of getting the fruit out of the tree without smashing. That will be the hard part, figuring out how to design it so it works, Lucas said. Paulo had a sudden flash. We can use the engineering design process. The what? Lucas said. It's the way my parents solve problems at work, Paulo said. We can ask Mai and Pa about when we get it home. When the boys reached the yard, the paracaídas sat still on the step where Paulo had left it. Paulo held up the parachute for Lucas to see. There are really only 3 parts, he said. The top is the canopy, the suspension lines are in the middle, and the load or weight it's carrying is attached at the bottom. So we need all 3 parts, Lucas said. But we could change some things about them, like the canopy's material, or its shape, Paulo said. It sounds like I'm at work, Mai said as she stepped outside. What are you boys up to? Paulo explained their plan to redesign the parachute and gather the fruit. And I told Lucas about the engineering design process, but I couldn't remember all the steps. That will really be helpful as you're designing, his mom said. First, you need to ask questions, like the questions about size, shape, and materials I heard you asking. I asked Paulo a bunch of questions about drag and atmosphere, too. Great! It sounds like you're almost ready to start the next step. Imagine. You imagine lots of different solutions, and then you choose one and make a detailed plan. And then you create your parachute, test it, and improve it. So you use all of those steps in your job? Lucas asked. We do. We have to do a lot of testing and improving, especially if what we're designing, a parachute or airplane or spacecraft, is going to travel through space or be used on another planet. Every material and part size and shape have to be designed carefully. Look over toward the launch pad, Mai said, pointing high above the trees and the houses. Paulo could see the huge tower with the green and black flag of Brazil painted on the top. Rising from the launch pad was the craft that the parents were working on. Why do you think the rocket is cone-shaped at the top? Maybe because the rocket needs to travel really quickly through the air, through our atmosphere, to get into space, Lucas said. Exactly. With a rocket, we want to create as little drag as possible. But with parachutes, we want a lot of drag, Lucas said. The shape of parachute is very different. Right again, she said. And when aerospace engineers think about drag, we don't just think about shape. We have to think about the atmosphere, the layer of gases surrounding the planet that the craft will go to, and how that atmosphere might be different from the atmosphere here on Earth. How would you design a parachute that would work on Mars? Lucas asked. You're really starting to sound like an engineer, she said. A lot of the time, aerospace engineers have to design technologies that will be used on other planets, but we can't visit other planets to test our design. Sometimes we can model what it will be like on other planets, or use what we know about the 2 environments to design something that could work on a planet like Mars. Isn't the atmosphere of Mars a lot thinner than our atmosphere? Paulo asked. That's right. The thickness of the atmosphere affects the amount of drag. The thinner atmosphere on Mars means there's less drag than here on Earth, so things fall more quickly on Mars than on Earth. You'd have to make a much bigger parachute to slow down the fall. But then how do you fit in the spacecraft? Asked Lucas. Another great question. You see, we don't only have to think about how the parachute will work, we also have to think about the strength of the materials that we're using and whether the final design will fit in the space that's available in the rocket. There are many different criteria to consider. Each design is unique and the place where it will be used and the criteria and goals we have. We have a goal for our parachute too, Lucas said, to help us collect some fruit. Let's get started, said Paulo. Later that afternoon, after brainstorming many different parachute designs, Paulo and Lucas decided on one they thought would work well. They drew a plan and listed the materials they would use. Then they created their parachute. I have an idea. We can attach this bucket to the parachute to test it so we don't break another fruit if it doesn't work, Lucas said. And maybe we need to add some rocks as a test load. Should we give it a try? Yeah, let's see how it works, Paulo said. Lucas stood on a chair on the stoop, held out his arm, and dropped the parachute. The bucket hit the ground with a thud, and the rocks tumbled out. Paulo looked at Lucas, his nose crinkled. The parachute slowed the load down a little, but I think we have to do better if we want to make sure the fruit doesn't crack or bruise. Maybe this will make a better canopy, Lucas said, holding up a scrap of different material. It doesn't have as many holes in it as the other material. I think this one will create more drag and fall more slowly. I think you're right, Paulo said. Let's design using this material. Lucas untied the old canopy and put the new one in place. I just have to attach a few suspension lines so that we can test it, Lucas said. His brow wrinkled as he concentrated on tying a knot. Paulo, can you give me a hand with this? He asked. Easier said than done, Paulo said, holding up his three-fingered hand. Lucas looked up, a deep blush spreading from his collar to the top of his forehead. It's okay, Paulo said, punching him lightly in the shoulder. I'm joking. Give me the string. Lucas smiled. Oh, man, he said. I would have felt awful if you were serious. Don't worry, Paulo said. There really aren't many things that are hard for me to do because of my hand. I'm used to it looking different. You'll get used to it, too. The next day, Paulo found himself again in the capoeira tree, putting a fruit into the bucket tied to their improvised paraquedas. Lucas stood on the ground, looking up into the green leaves of the tree. Okay, Paulo said. Are you ready? Ready, Lucas said. Let it go. Paulo released the parachute. He held his breath as he watched the fruit float down like a leaf in the wind. Finally, with a soft glide, the fruit landed gently on the ground. We did it, Lucas called. Paulo climbed down, then jumped the last few feet from the tree and ran over to inspect the fruit for himself. Good job, Paulo said. Lucas and Paulo slapped hands to congratulate each other. It wasn't until they were walking home that Paulo realized he had used his three-fingered hand. We did it, Paulo called across the yard. Not one scratch or bruise on it, Lucas said, holding up the fruit. A successful mission, Pi said. This calls for a celebration. Now, if we only knew someone who made really good capoeira ice cream. That's my cue, May said. I think I can have some ready by dinner time. How does that sound? She asked Paulo and Lucas. Great, Paulo said. I know some other people who would like having ice cream with us, Julia said, turning toward Paulo. What do you say? Can I invite the other neighbors too? Yeah, Lucas said. It'll be your welcome to the neighborhood party. Sounds good to me, Paulo said. Hey, you know what we could do till then? Lucas asked. Sometimes on the weekend there are soccer games in the field by school. Want to go see if anyone's playing? Yeah, Paulo said. Let me grab my stuff. He ran down the hallway to his room where the last box from the move still held his soccer ball. This time, a big smile spread across Paulo's face as he grabbed the ball and ran outside. The end.